This is the Open Source Entrepreneur Network podcast with me, your host, John Mark Walker. Today we're honored to have as our guest Craig McLuckie. Craig is widely known as the co-founder of the Kubernetes project while he was still at Google. He was instrumental in assembling a wide array of vendors to create the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, a collaborative project with the Linux Foundation. More recently, Craig took his Kubernetes expertise, assembled a team, and co-founded Heptio, where they are busy putting together next-generation cloud-native products around Kubernetes. And now here's our guest, Craig McLuckie.
So, as you mentioned, I spent quite a lot of time at Google, and the first product I got to work on there was a product called Google Compute Engine. And my friend Joe Bader was the engineering lead and founder of that project, and I came on to help sort of figure out the business side of taking it to market. And one of the things we observed pretty early on was this gap that existed between the way that people would experience compute through something like Google Compute Engine, which is a VM-based offering, and the way that the broader engineering community at Google experienced compute through this technology that was internally known as Borg. Borg was a sort of modern cloud-native cluster scheduler. In fact, one of the sort of the early originators of this genre of orchestration technology. And we got to thinking a lot about how to bring some of the advantages of a technology like Borg to the broader community. And in conjunction with this sort of third friend of ours, Brendan Burns, came up with the idea to create an open source cluster scheduler that looked and felt like Borg, but would work very well for smaller deployments. So you could take 3 or 4 virtual machines or physical machines, stitch them together, and create a solution that offered a lot of the advantages that modern orchestration technologies, as we saw them, would bring to this burgeoning container ecosystem. At the time, Docker was becoming popular, and it was solving a lot of problems around portability and creating a hermetically sealed image, but we knew that there was more to the problem, because we'd just seen it firsthand. And that's how Kubernetes was born. And inside Google, it was paired with a commercial product called Google Container Engine, which is an incredibly successful part of the Google Cloud portfolio. And
so hang on, let me stop you there for a second. So you guys wanted to create a kind of software project, kind of like Borg deployments. The obvious question that comes to mind are, what was already out there? I mean, there was Mesos, there were some other things. What was missing that you guys are really trying to fill that didn't exist?
So Mesos was out there, and I spent a lot of time looking at sort of Mesos, the technology. At the same time as also Docker existed, and I spent a lot of time looking at Docker. At the end of the day, we decided to double down on Docker, but we didn't see Mesos as being the right technology for us. We certainly had legitimacy, had some really great engineering, and had been operating at scale for a while. But there were a few things that when I really dug into Mesos, just didn't speak to me. The first was the shape of the community. Mesos is kind of an ASF project that was really being run by a single commercial entity, and I just didn't see a sort of practical way to create the openness that we've enjoyed with the Kubernetes community in the sort of Mesos ecosystem, short of something hostile, which just is a non-starter in these situations. Started looking at the code base, and there was a relatively large C++-based code base at a time when the world was moving towards Go, and so we wanted to be able to work in Go to sort of, just far more productive than what we're seeing in C++. But more importantly, as I started thinking about the way that people would use these technologies, I wanted to create something that would be very small and personal and flexible. Mesos was solving problems of operating at scale, but the systems integrators and customers that I spoke to that had actually been using the technology said it was relatively complex and difficult to set up. It was really focused on that Borg-like scale, getting to 10,000 nodes. And what I really wanted was something where we could take it to a DevOps team and say, displace this technology you've been using to manage 4 or 5 virtual machines with something more progressive. And so that was really important to get that sort of lightweight flexibility. In many ways, that's why I pushed the team so hard in the early days to focus on smaller clusters. I don't know if you remember back in the day, but we really focused on getting the story right for sub 100 nodes. At a time when a lot of folks really focused on that sort of 10,000 node deployment, and it was clear that's just not where people were. And the final part of it was
one of the early criticisms when Kubernetes first came out was, oh well, it's not actually Borg. It's just it's a small knockoff or whatever. It doesn't actually run anything at Google. That was kind of one of the early criticisms when you guys first launched. So that sort of answers that question directly.
Yeah, and I mean you wouldn't want Borg, and even if you had Borg, you probably couldn't use it. It's just you couldn't use it if you had it, and even if you could, you probably don't want it. It's a pretty fancy, complex system, it was pretty clear that the path to success didn't start at 10,000 nodes. The path to success started with 3 engineers and 10 virtual machines and a very personal experience with the technology, and that's what we really focus on with Kubernetes.
Great. Okay, so you have this project, Kubernetes. It starts to grow very fast. You got a lot of usage early on, a lot of notoriety. It seemed to be very positively received. And then you started getting commercial involvement. Kind of help me understand the transition from open source community project to suddenly all these vendors are involved. You've got Red Hat involved. You've got I mean, obviously Google is very much the Kubernetes originator, but then you've got CoreOS coming on board, and then others.
Yeah, so I think it's been incredibly encouraging to see the community converging around the technology, and I think one of the greatest possible compliments is to have folks embrace the technology and start to bet their business on it. As we've seen with all these vendors. And so, I can say nothing but positive things about the community that's emerged. Red Hat, and a lot of the success of Kubernetes was really grounded in our willingness to be open and supportive of the broader vendor community emerging. So if you think about what's made Kubernetes great, in the very early days, I don't think if we had tried to create a closed ecosystem, it would have worked for 2 reasons. One is the community would have rejected it, right? It would have caused a lot of sort of disconnect, but more importantly, it would have been a weaker product. Much of the strength of Kubernetes is driven by the strength of the vendors who feel ownership of it. Look at what Red Hat did in sort of driving the role-based access control and a lot of the enterprise-specific features that they needed to run it. Look at the work they've done to make it work multi-tenant. Look at the work that CoreOS has done around the operator framework and making it sort of more suitable to run workloads that need sort of orchestrated capabilities. Like this openness has created a much better technology. But obviously, it creates an interesting challenge from a startup perspective. Like you're walking into this highly contested area where there's a lot of more established vendors than you, and you need to be a little bit scrappy about that.
Right. Absolutely. So even despite vendors jumping in and making products, you decided to kind of create your own, right? I mean, tell me about how Heptio came about.
Yeah, it's interesting. I spent a lot of time, speaking to people in this ecosystem. And one of the things I observed is that almost all of the vendors that were operating in the Kubernetes space had what I'd consider incumbent solutions. So the solutions were always tied to something else that the customers didn't necessarily want. It was always tied to, a traditional enterprise OS when customers were tired of paying for that. Or it was tied to a specific cloud provider at a time when customers wanted portability, or it's tied to a very specific sort of distribution model when customers wanted flexibility and valued heterogeneity. And so the thing that I observed that was missing in the ecosystem was a company that was really focused on helping customers just get more out of the upstream pieces and consume the technology the way that made sense for them. And so, this is what Heptio is about. It's about giving customers that little bit of extra help, when they've had some success with the open source technologies, but they just need a little bit more training, support, services, etc., to get them out of the energy curve. And at the end of the day, we aspire to just drive down the cost of operations for these technologies.
So make Kubernetes easier to manage, make what you're trying to do with Kubernetes easy to do, kind of the easy button for Kubernetes, or would you describe it as a different way?
Yeah, I would say that's pretty much right. And it's not just about the easy button, it's about providing the tools you need to operate it in a sort of a production environment on your terms. So, I think a lot about the the cloud providers have created, they live in a different economic reality to everybody else, right? Like they can basically take an open source technology and monetize it by simply selling underlying compute network and storage resources.
Right.
And so, what cloud represents is the most spectacular deflationary force we've seen, in existence in the enterprise software space.
Right.
And then, you add to that the challenge of the fact that open source software itself is an incredibly deflationary environment because the barriers to entry are non-existent. A healthy community has a lot of alternatives. And, if you spend a lot of time trying to build a fancy go-to-market mechanism, someone else who doesn't have your cost of operations is going to come in and offer something that's essentially the same, but is cheaper because they don't have to pay your customer acquisition costs.
Right.
So it's a challenging world.
What is your kind of product strategy? I mean, you mentioned services and support, but what are you really building for the customer, and who are you targeting there?
So our position is a little different to the traditional distro providers today, who are looking to engage at relatively high levels of the organization and win an enterprise deal at the sort of macro level. Our focus is instead on the departmental users who've discovered Kubernetes, have self-identified as Kubernauts, and just need a little bit of extra help, right? So they just need a little bit of help, making sure that their cluster is qualified. They need a little bit of training to just help them get over the learning curve. They need some simple tools that reduce the cost of operations for them. And so we don't see ourselves as going head-to-head with Red Hats or the CoreOSs or the IBMs or the Canonicals or the other 100 people that are eminently qualified to provide these robust distributions.
Right.
We're more focused on helping the folks that are coming at it from the side to succeed.
Okay, it's coming at from the side. Sorry, were you mid-sentence or was that?
No, that's it. So they this is the folks that go to a meetup and they discover Kubernetes and
right.
They try it on 10 virtual machines and they love it. They just need a bit more help. Then
got it. Okay, so when you so now for the most annoying question I always get, why are they going to pay for something they get for free?
So
are you going to hold things to introduce scarcity?
No, this is the interesting thing. The economics of the basic Kubernetes distro market have already been set, and I hate to say it, but it's free. That's just
right.
is right. Like,
right.
This is the price point we established with Google Container Engine. It's basically free. This is the price point we established with a variety of these other technologies, and so at the end of the day, I truly believe that if you approach an open source community as a value extraction exercise, you're going to fail. It's not there to make you rich. It's there to help customers over the curve. And so our sort of focus is relentlessly on honest technology. Can we deliver a set of simple, honest tools that people feel good about paying for, that are helping them make better use of the open source technology? Right? It's not just about trying to monetize the open source technology. It's about delivering the frameworks and tools and capabilities and training and support and services they need around that.
That sounds pretty close to the Red Hat model. I mean, because Red Hat has this kind of, they have this strategy where they assemble kind of upstream components. They put it in kind of their branded communities, like say Fedora or whatever. And then from there, they do some further hardening to produce the enterprise product they sell. I mean, what you're saying sounds very close to that. And the benefit of that is, because they put so much effort into creating the community products around, say, Fedora or Managed IQ or even Gluster and Ceph, is that they have this sort of cut of product management that's able to make sure things work together. And then, before they go down the path of, and this is the enterprise thing that we sell. Is that kind of what you're aiming for, or is this even simpler than that?
This is even simpler than that. I mean, I think one has to respect Red Hat's success in this market. Red Hat's done amazing work in terms of creating a stable and sort of just dead stable open source ecosystem for providers. The challenge, as I see it, is that it's not clear to me how Red Hat's value proposition translates to the cloud environment, frankly.
Right.
Like, Canonical is eating RHEL's lunch in the cloud, and every Red Hat Kubernetes deal starts with RHEL. Like, that's just not how customers run in the cloud. So
Right.
what are they going to do, right? And I think it's a challenge. And I think, I don't have the sort of arrogance here to say that we will ever be as successful as Red Hat. I mean, Red Hat's just done amazing work in the ecosystem. They've just created tremendous value for enterprises. But I do believe that there's a profound disruption that's happening right now as cloud economics are taking hold, and it's changing the way that people think about technology. And there's this burgeoning sense that open source needs to be, it's a lot of people have this very personal relationship with the open source technology that they run. They're willing to, stand up a team to maintain it. I see so many large enterprise companies that, historically would have, just paid those sort of Red Hat fees to run a technology, but they step back and they say, you know what, if I had, 10 or 15 engineers, I could probably run, Kubernetes on, the 100,000 nodes. And this is not a made up example, right?
Right.
And the fee that I'm being charged is just disproportionate for the value that I'm achieving. And so we're looking to just fill the gaps between where customers are, what sort of level of heterogeneity they need, and the economic reality that the cloud is dictating.
Right. So basically, whatever the customer, whatever platform they want to run it on, whatever cloud they want to run it in, you want to allow them to do so.
And whatever geography. I think this is the thing that's interesting is almost every customer I encounter has some component of heterogeneity. They want it on this OS, in this cloud, in this way, with this sort of extension, or this kind of, this tuning. And then they want it in these geographies. And a lot of customers I speak to are trying to figure out how to run workloads in US geographies and China geographies.
Right.
And there's just this sort of relatively non-overlapping cloud story between those two. So technologies like this really help, and I think we need to find a way to make them accessible to the enterprise. And so I think the way I tend to describe us is, we aspire to be the discount carrier of enterprise open source software. So this is kind of the Southwest Airlines to more traditional, United circa 2000.
Oh wow.
And I think, and it's necessary because the economic world has changed. Like cloud is, it's just profound deflationary force on enterprise software prices. And so right now we're just looking for our $8 drink and our $25 check bag.
But you don't charge for carry-on luggage, right? I mean, because that would
exactly. So we may end up charging for carrying on luggage, but we're hoping that we create the best possible quality of service and really change the narrative around the economics of this stuff.
Got it. So what's coming up? What can we look for with the understanding that forward-looking statements and all that, but coming from Heptio in the near future?
Yeah, so we've been very focused on providing supported configurations on Amazon. We'll continue to do that. We're starting to bolster and strengthen our training portfolio and professional services team, so that will all be available. And our early focus, in the next little while, will be, helping customers just manage the cost of supporting their clusters. I don't think we can really afford to take tier 3 support calls at the end of the day. And so we just need to make sure they go away. And that means, really radically simplifying the operating model for, clusters in relatively heterogeneous environments.
I was going to say that's a pretty tall order, but
yeah, no kidding.
But you got the team on board to tackle it. So I certainly wish you luck in doing so.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
What any parting shots before we go away?
No, I think it's my sort of advice to entrepreneurs in my situation right now is the following, which is really take the time to understand the economics, and it's not enough to design a product and establish product market fit. You also need that go-to-market fit, and you need to understand the sort of the long-term economic realities of our world, and sort of what the barriers to entry look like. So I think it's definitely something where it's worth taking some time to really think through what cloud is doing to enterprise software and
That's
what
a really good point. In fact, on that note, I've heard from some entrepreneurs that they have difficulty raising money from investors with an open source product. Can you speak to that a little bit?
I think if you come to an investor and you say, I'm going to extract value from this open source community, they would be right to meet you with skepticism. Like it's an indefensible business. But there are a lot of ways to add value. I think you have to look at the edges between open source ecosystems. I think you need to look at the way that people are looking to consume the technology.
Right.
And there's an opportunity to sell the dream. I think there's people out there who are doing amazing work and have built successful businesses. I mean, obviously Red Hat is the gold standard in what folks have been able to accomplish in the enterprise space. But even companies like Cloud Foundry do an amazing job around an open source technology. Pivotal has
that's right.
They really come in and sell the dream. They'll help explain not just what the technology is, but how it will transform your business and how it can displace some of the legacy, really expensive and difficult systems.
You're absolutely selling the dream of IT transformation and cloud transformation. Exactly. I've been very impressed with how they've been able to do that. That's actually a really good point. I'm glad you brought that up. Cool.
Yep.
Awesome. Cool. All right. Well, hey, thank you so much for spending time with us, and look forward to hearing more from you guys in the future.
Sounds great. Looking forward to it. Thank you.
All right. So I'm gonna